Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, and with me, again, finally, Patrick Minton, NBA Geek co-host. You're back, Patrick. Say hey.
Hey, it's great to be back.
You chose a great day to be back because there's actually, we have basically gotten to the point where we spent, I think, 50% of last week's show, Brian, just talking TV we were enjoying, and we're going to do that again. We're going to talk Rick and Morty and Game of Thrones. But there's actually NBA news today, so I'm very excited for that. And then, as always, we are produced by our amazing co-host, producer, man of many hats, our voice of God, Brian Foster. Brian, say
hey. What's going on, Dre? And yeah, good TV to talk about, good NBA. I even watched The Defenders, which came out, and we will not be talking about that. But a lot going on at the end of the summer here.
All right, so we're going to have two topics. We're going to have our off-season game, which is Rick and Morty versus Game of Thrones. It's replacing our game from last year, which was the NBA playoffs versus Game of Thrones, because they weren't on in time. Although, sad news, I didn't realize this, Brian. There are actually only 7 episodes of Game of Thrones, so we're hitting
the finals.
Season finale next week, and so we're still going to have a month before the NBA starts to have to figure something else out. We'll be fine. And then we do still have like a month of Rick and Morty after that, although as we kind of noted, there's not anything for it to go up against, so we'll just have to figure something out. Maybe we'll just still keep talking Rick and Morty. Maybe we'll talk something else. Maybe there will be more news. And speaking of which, we're also going to talk the big news, which is Kyrie Irving was traded to the from the Cleveland Cavaliers to the Boston Celtics. So this is huge. Let's get into the boring one. I'm sure we're going to be champing at the bit to talk the other. Game of Thrones versus Rick and Morty. Patrick hasn't actually seen Rick and Morty. Out of curiosity, Patrick, have you seen any Rick and Morty or just not this season?
I feel like I've seen like parts of one episode maybe, but
yeah. It's your kind of show.
I'll give the normal throughout. It's
I
one
just
of the
don't have time. There's so many TV shows.
The defense I'll give it is this: it's only if you go into this season, only 22 episodes to get caught up going into season 3. They're 30-minute ones. They go by super duper quick. If you buy Hulu I believe is the one that actually has them. So on Hulu, they're super quick. I agree with your plight, Patrick. It's something I've been vexed on about my kid. How basically my kid is going to have access to everything. All the books, all the movies, everything. The choice to see everything. When I was a kid, you'd have like VHS tapes and you watch the same one over and over and over again because if there was nothing good on TV, that's not a problem. I will say, check out Rick and Morty though. If you can get time to watch Rick and Morty, it's worth checking out. So Brian and I'll talk Rick and Morty first. Then we'll talk Game of Thrones because I know all of us will have stuff to say there. So the game, by the way, is which episode wins? Rick and Morty. I don't have it up in front of me, and as I've said, week in and week out, I still haven't replaced my computer. My Surface Pro really, really sucks for having like multiple tabs. So I have a script I have on it, and then I run podcasting stuff on it too, so it's really hard for me to hop screen. So I'm not going to do that. It's, I think, the Whirly-Durly conspiracy, was it called,
Correct,
Brian?
correct.
Did I get it right? Okay. And then Game of Thrones, we're going to go full-on spoilers for both. This is your last warning for spoilers, full spoiler warnings. Ironic joke about this, Patrick and Brian. I'm going to call it the Ice Dragon episode. And a friend of mine told me if you have HBO Go now, the little icon, if you were going to click on this week's episode, is an image of the Ice Dragon. So complete spoilers. So, although to be fair, if you go to Yahoo now at this point, Yahoo in their headlines just has full-on spoilers. So if you haven't caught up on Game of Thrones by Tuesday, the internet doesn't give a damn. Twitter doesn't give a damn. It's already been memified, gifified, everything. So, but anyway, let's talk Rick and Morty. Between those two episodes, Brian, we're going to have another split decision. Who do you think won this week? Rick and Morty had the better episode or Game of Thrones?
Yeah, I'm reversing my decision from last week to say that Rick and Morty was better than Game of Thrones this week. Controversials.
Quick recap, the Rick and Morty episode, what ends up happening is Rick takes Jerry, who has been divorced from Beth, at the hands of Rick. Rick basically talked Beth into divorcing Jerry. Rick takes Jerry on an adventure, basically because Morty feels sorry for him. And they go to essentially a Westworld-ish place. Side tangent there. What I really loved about this episode is it did poke, as this show is prone to do, it pokes fun at things. It did basically in one scene show the problem with every single Westworld, Jurassic Park, whatever like scenario. This world has a force field, so you can't die. And so, of course, people are running around shooting each other. And then, of course, Rick and Jerry break the force field temporarily and someone shoots someone and they die. And that's the problem with every single, like Westworld. It's like, what happens if there is a technical glitch just once? There you go. They go to a theme park where they're basically just going to blow off steam so that they can lie and say they had a real adventure, because that's what Morty wanted. Morty wanted Rick to take Jerry on an adventure. It turns out to be an actual adventure because there's an assassination plot on Rick's life that Jerry temporarily helps out in. There's actually some character development for Jerry, some character development between the Rick and Jerry relationship. So actually, all in all, it's a great episode. And the B story is that Summer has body issue problems and uses a device to try and make her breasts bigger, and then ends up turning herself into the gigantic woman. And then there's another fun B plot there. I'm going to because we actually have NBA news, I'm going to try not to focus on as much of it this week. But Brian, I'll let you explain why you thought this episode won, and then I'll get us into Game of Thrones.
Yeah, so it's the same reason as I had last week too, which was that last week Game of Thrones had a lot of build-up in the past, and then it really paid off last week with some cool stuff that I liked. Although now it seems like maybe it's going a different direction, but I won't cancel that. Whereas Rick and Morty was just kind of maybe building up to something, maybe kind of being random, maybe not. This week in Rick and Morty, it was Jerry's return, which was a pretty big payoff. He's been gone since episode 1 of this season, and let's remember that episode 1 did not air at the beginning of this season. It aired months and months before. So really it's been a long time since we've known what Jerry's been up to. He is a fan favorite. I was saying before the show, I'm not as big a fan of his as everyone else. But he was great. His stuff was great in this episode. And you mentioned the big punchline of the episode, which was, the little boy shooting the little girl and thinking she would come back to life and actually dying. A lot of the critics have been saying this season is especially dark, even compared to the last seasons. And I think that kind of, innocuous setup into a dead little girl alien was pretty dark, but funny at the same time. So...
Yeah, I'll hop
pretty
in
good episode.
Watching the entire show, I don't necessarily agree with that. They destroyed the Earth in the first season and killed themselves and buried themselves in the backyard.
That's fair.
Sorry for all the spoilers, Patrick. I hope you're covering your ears. But I do actually feel that the lack of Jerry this season has hindered something. The one line you said you're not a big Jerry fan pre-show.
I'm a fan. I just don't think he's one of the best characters, like I think a lot of people do.
What I'm going to throw out is to Dan Harmon and Community, where he actually talks about the Dean and how the Dean is never going to show up as anybody's favorite character or best character.
Is this John Lithgow's character? I haven't watched that very much.
Lithgow.
What show am I thinking of?
That was Dexter, maybe?
I don't know. There's some college show where John Lithgow is a crazy guy. Anyway, keep going.
In Community, the Dean is this kind of annoying side character, and he's argued no one's going to claim this character is the best, but the character does so much for the show in terms of cohesion, plot development, etc. And I'd say Jerry is the same way. And actually, this season has felt a little weaker to me, and I'm wondering if the lack of Jerry has impacted it. So I did like that Jerry was back and that they actually advanced his character some in this episode. So I did like that. To your point about that being why it won this week, it doesn't win this week, unfortunately, though it was. I'm glad both series put up a solid episode. Game of Thrones just won. Some awesome CGI, some awesome fight scenes. An ice dragon is there. I loved it. I'm curious, Patrick, did you like this week's episode of Game of Thrones?
I liked parts of it. I'm in the camp that thinks like, okay, we've like sped up time too much, and it's like somebody invented a new technology in this ancient world where people can travel by gateway and get to wherever they want to go really fast.
Oh, I have some analytics to rebut you.
If that actually happened and it was a plot point, that'd be cool, but it didn't. So, in fact, like the bits with the White Walkers, with what's his name, Gendry running and then sending the Raven and then having the dragons come all in time, that didn't bother me so much. Ironically, what's really pissing me off is Tyrion just swinging by King's Landing to meet Jaime and then getting back to talk to Daenerys again. I think that was last week. Like those kinds of time things that have been happening is like, do you remember where in season 1 where it took them like fucking 6 episodes to travel from the north to King's Landing? Like it took them like forever. There was a giant train. And now it's like, oh, we just hopped there and back in one episode. And it's like, maybe if he was flying on Dragonback.
Well, to be fair, there's actually in this episode of Rick and Morty this week, there's a funny line where Jerry thinks that Rick's going to assassinate him, and this show breaks the fourth wall a lot. Rick and Morty does, and Rick actually says out loud, he goes, "Do you really think they'd waste time on a scene of what would happen if I was going to be taking you out to kill you right now?" Just noting that. Why would we waste the narrative space? So, the reason in season 1 it took them 3 billion years to just go on a walk is because all the characters are together in a caravan. There's stuff going on. They're fighting each other. They're killing direwolves, etc. And now it's like, well, that trip was uneventful. They weren't attacked. They weren't ambushed. They didn't run into anybody. Let's just let it happen. I will agree wholeheartedly with you, though, where it, the metaphor, the sci-fi comparison I'll give it is like Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, where if you look at everything that's going on, you're like, this timeline, it takes place and feels like the span of 2 weeks, but for all this to make sense, it would have to have been months, but they just, that's their out, right? They say, this probably did take months. We're just not showing you all of it, right? They can't travel at light speed, so we're not going to show you just them traveling slowly. But I agree, and I think, Brian, if you're pulling up the map or whatever that someone drew, like, yeah, if you look at how much each of these characters has traveled, essentially in between scenes, it's kind of like, this is getting played at 10x speed, essentially, for our convenience.
Yeah, and no, I'm actually kind of a fan of things speeding up, but some things are bothering me. And I mean...
Yeah, it's tough to accept.
Well, part of it, I think, is they're trying to bring the show to a climax, right? And it's still kind of awesome because you spent all that ridiculous time in the first 4, 5, 6 seasons really getting to know all these characters. So it's a big payoff now to see them all come together and see plot lines come to fruition, etc. At the same time, it feels just a little bit rushed. Like, not hugely rushed. But so, for instance, I'm like, okay, I get that you wanted to wrap things up in season 7 and 8, but why again does season 7 have to be 7 episodes and season 8 has to be 6 episodes? Like, why?
I think it's budget. I think it's budget. They're spending more budget per episode, so they're having less episodes per season, is what I understand.
No. There was a big news story about how this is what the showrunners wanted, and the head of HBO was like, fuck that, I want more episodes. I want this thing run.
Interesting.
Like, if it were up to him, the profit they make on this, I think they'd want it to run 20 seasons.
Yeah.
And I understand the showrunner saying, look, we want to move on to other things. We want to get done. But I think it didn't need to be... Like, I think if they stretched this season out to 10 episodes and then next season 2, it would be just enough so that it didn't feel quite so rushed. And we have some characters doing things that are just completely out of character to move the plot along, right? And that's pissing me off too, right? Like, one week Arya's super happy to see her sister. The next week she's like in this big fight with her, right? One week Sansa's like learning to become a good statesman and growing up and figuring things out. The next week she's like this complete idiot who is fooled by every amateur move that Littlefinger makes. It's like that kind of, and that's all just to move the plot along. So, I feel like if we're up 10 episodes, they wouldn't need to resort to these ridiculous tricks to move the plot along.
And that's why I didn't like Game of Thrones as much this week, is because they threw all these balls up in the air. And a lot of the reviews were critical. They're just like, these are all flaws in the plot. None of this makes sense. I'm a little more measured. I'm going to give them time, maybe not even next episode, but next season as well, to see where this sorts out. But it is a lot of confusing stuff right now. Like, the Arya versus Sansa versus Littlefinger, that could go in just about any direction.
That is, well, I mean, I'll jump in on that and say, what bugs me about that story, and I'll give them the out, but I hate this out, is that story is so easily resolved with any one of those characters, Bronn, Sansa, Arya, asking a very simple question that might show up in normal conversation, right?
Yeah.
Oh, he hands Bran the dagger, and Bran says, "Do you know who this dagger came from?" And he says, "No." And later someone can talk to Bran and say whatever, right? Just ask Bran a question, and Bran can say, "Oh yeah, I use my mind powers to see this," or vice versa. When Sansa sees the note that Arya gives her, and she goes, "Where did you get this?" and she says she doesn't tell her. It's like all she has to say is, "I Littlefinger had it." So it's like Littlefinger's not clever, but the reason they're doing this is it's really, really easy in a book format to have like Arya find a note and not realize Littlefinger hid it for her, et cetera, et cetera. But because this is visual, this is television, and they're, as Patrick's noting, just speeding it up to high hell, basically we have to see Littlefinger standing right there, or have Littlefinger just talk to the person directly. So it's very, very, because we had to see those scenes together, we had to see Littlefinger do that so that we as the audience know 100% what happened.
Do we, though? I don't think so. I think that could be there to trick us, and Sansa and Arya are working together. That could easily be possible.
I hope you're right, but, like last season we got fooled by the Waif. We had all this hope that, the Waif killing her, it was she traded faces, or it was secretly Jaqen who had done the face. There are all these great theories, and no, it was played straight. And I had a friend I talked to too. Yeah, this story's getting played straight. It's just stupid.
We'll see.
I hope the story's getting played straight, because let's be honest, if they show some kind of thing where they were just working together to fool Littlefinger, then they totally cheated. They did cheap ass bad storytelling, because they're showing scenes of, for instance, where Arya and Sansa are fighting, where Littlefinger is nowhere to be seen, nor would it even be logical to think that he could be spying on them. So for them to show a scene like that and then later be they're working together, that would essentially just be very poor storytelling, where they're essentially just cheating and they're pulling it. I mean, they're pulling tons of Deus Ex Machinas everywhere anyway, but this would be it would be ridiculous. It would be totally unearned. It would not be a reveal where you'd sweet. I could see signs of that coming, but I wasn't sure. This would be no, there were no signs of that coming. You hit all the signs just to cheat us and get this big reveal moment.
I mean, I think there's so. Oh, go ahead, Dre.
I know what I was actually going to say. I keep coming back to Rick and Morty. It's funny how it compares. They actually made fun of one of my favorite tropes too, that actually showed up in Empire Strikes Back, which is the two friends that haven't seen each other in forever meet each other, and they're with a third friend. So what happened in Empire Strikes Back is Han Solo and Lando come up to meet each other, and Lando pretends he's really mad and is going to punch Han Solo, and then at the last second stops, and they shake hands and hug and laugh as friends. And the same thing happens, I think, in Terminator 2 or something. And on Cracked, they've noted just how stupid this is, because it's your friend doesn't know what's going on. And did you really take the time together to be next time we see each other, let's pretend to be really mad, almost come to blows in the middle of a bunch of heavily armed people. And so what you're saying right there, right, is it would be unearned, because that doesn't make any sense, but that's a common trope. So I'm going to be unhappy either way. If Brian's right and they're playing Littlefinger, it doesn't make any sense. And if Brian's wrong and they're playing it straight, it was just
I think there's a lot more possibilities than that, though. There's another chance that's just Arya's hated Sansa her whole life, and maybe she always planned to come in here and overthrow her, regardless of Littlefinger. Or maybe Sansa and Littlefinger are working together still. That's also a possibility. And again, they would not have shown that well. So I just think, who knows what's going to happen there. And yeah, I agree. A lot of the outcomes are probably lame.
I have a really good transition to our topic, so I'll let you get the last word, Brian, and then see if I can transition us to NBA.
Oh, man, I've got so much to say, so I'm sad that we need to go. But one big thing is Clegane Bowl, very likely to happen next week. There's a preview of the Hound in King's Landing. I am rooting for them to set it up and then fade to black and have it happen next season. That would be the biggest troll ever. The Kidnap the White plan is another one of those examples where it still seems like it makes no sense and it's still kind of off the rails. But there's still time for it to come together next week, so we'll see what happens. Another big thing is, I just need a couple of minutes, Dre. I'm sorry, I did so much research here. So another big thing is people are pissed off about this screenshot I'm showing right now from Ben Lindbergh's Twitter, which is the Night King not throwing his ice spear at the guys sitting on the island for several days. And That's what the math turns out to be, by the way. Probably 2 to 4 days for a raven to get down to Dragonstone and a dragon to fly up to them up there. So it's possible. It's possible if you do the math. But he just ignores the stationary getaway dragon Drogo that's right next to him to go at the riderless moving target up in the air dragon and kill that. So why would he do it that way? And then why would he wait and not throw his ice spear at the humans? Well, it could be a work, right? Dre, you had this theory that maybe the White Walker is not going to move south of the wall ever. Maybe the White Walkers are the good guys. You know, maybe Bran is working with them. Like, who knows? Why did Benjen come out of nowhere and save, you know, Jon again? Maybe he's working with the Night King. Like,
what I was going to say, Brian, there is, we've both seen the math. We probably have a link to it in the show notes about, you know, Jon has basically gone, like, done this, like, if you're watching my finger on air, like, gone all over Westeros, and the White Walkers have been, like, here the whole time. And so, like, maybe the White Walkers are just up north playing with their polar bears or whatever, and then these people from south keep coming up and attacking them. You know, they're trying to kidnap them. They attack them with dragons, and finally, like, F it. We got to deal with these Southerners who keep attacking us. So maybe the White Walkers were never a threat. They were just going to stay up north, do whatever, and the reason war starts is like the preemptive. The South keeps causing shit with them.
Well, there's a play on that because isn't that the whole thing with the what was his name? The friend of the Night's Watch, where the guy who sacrifices babies to them. What the fuck was that guy's name again?
Krender or
It was
I'm getting it
sort
wrong.
of the sea.
Craster's Keep.
Craster. So I mean, there was a
Krendor.
bit of this idea that okay, they killed him and he stopped sacrificing his babies, and that's when the Night Walkers are like, hey, where are our sacrifices? Fuck you, let's move. Like this kind of idea that he was, you know, holding them in check by sacrificing his kids to them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, but then there's also in the mythology of the stories is like every once in a while the White Walkers march. That's just what happens. It's as the wheel of time turns, right? And like people don't remember it anymore because the Night Watch has stood for thousands of years without it happening. But it does happen every once in a while, right?
But did the Starks
let's not
screw
forget
them
that
over
there were people north of the wall, and those people were definitely being hunted and killed by White Walkers.
Yeah. I didn't say it was a good. I was just laughing because I basically, you know, it was the same point where if we look at how much is going down south with everybody speeding up and how slow it's going on up north, of course it's moving at the speed of plot because that's what stories do. That was just my funny flippant remark.
Real fast,
right.
Dre. One of the things we talked about last week was there's going to be a death toll for this heist mission. What is that going to be? Turns out it's just Thoros of Myr, who most people don't really care about from the show. Book fans care about a lot more. I'm a big fan of his, but that's fine. You know, we expected him to die. Maybe Dondarrion or more. But then they threw in a bunch of red shirts to die, which is kind of weird and unexpected, but whatever. It worked, you know.
Did the Hound get bit or something? There was something weird going on when he grabbed the thing.
He did get bit at the beginning, so that could still set up the White Hound versus Zombie Mountain Clegane Bowl. Although it seems like the Hound is no worse for wear after a few days passed in that episode.
I don't remember the mythology here. This isn't like zombies, right? You don't get infected by being bitten, right? You get turned after you die.
I think so. So the bite was suspicious, but I guess he's okay.
Yeah, they just spent an inordinate amount of time on it. Is all, which is weird. So.
And I mean, I don't know if it's entirely clear from the in the movies, but it seems to be made fairly clear in the books that Gregor Clegane is dead. Like he's essentially the southern version of the White Walker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he was brought back to life by crazy shit that
in the books they haven't even called him Gregor Clegane yet. They've only called him Robert Strong, I think. Good name for that. But
so I mean, I'm betting that there's some kind of like, you know, Qyburn has brought somebody back from the dead, so maybe Qyburn has a role to play in figuring out how to kill the White Walkers, right? Aside from the obvious like obsidian and fire.
Well,
and also in the books, I don't know if this was ever made clear in the show, but in the books, it's made clear that direwolves can kill the undead.
Ooh, interesting. Like, I do not.
Like
remember.
there's a scene where a ghost kills one and it doesn't come back. Like when a direwolf kills a White Walker, it stays dead.
That stuff's related because the the Green Seers can warg into the Direwolves, and it's potential that the Night King could just be warging into all these whites. So it might be a similar magic, but anyway. One thing that worked about this for me, too, is that they really paid off all these guys joining together that hadn't been together in a long time or had never met before. They all had good dialogue, and even Thoros had that great conversation with Jorah about the charge on Pike. He got to relive his glory days before he died. So a lot of good tidbits and fan service there. I thought that worked out. Last thing on this, they didn't sacrifice very many of the people in the heist group, but the way they pulled it together is they did sacrifice the dragon. That pulled in Daenerys, so that moved that thing along really quickly. After, as this great tweet from Dem Thrones shows, Tyrion and Daenerys have had the same conversation for 6 straight episodes. So hopefully this Daenerys stuff finally gets moved along. So, all right, that's all my Game of Thrones.
Well, it was a ton. Okay, yeah, and again,
most of it, all the important stuff.
In a normal week, we would have kept talking maybe for another 20 minutes, Brian. But the fact of the matter is, big news. Boston finally cashed in their chips. We've been making fun of them for passing on DeMarcus Cousins. We've been making fun of them for somehow not ending up with Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler slipped through their fingers. Paul George maybe. Obviously some of those names, like I as I noted in the article I wrote this week, I thought Paul George was going to be an overhyped name that some team overspent on, and somehow OKC slipped in and is the only deal. I think that is the only possible deal that could have happened for Paul George, where I would say I thought it was a good deal for the team that got Paul George, wasn't really a good deal for the Pacers, and is one that I actually agreed with the motives fully. To be fair, the motive was we're going to erase a mistake we made, but still, as we're going to be talking about a team that just made a major mistake, teams don't often seem to realize when they've made mistakes, as my dogs are agreeing with, and just keep thinking about sunk costs. It's something I think what your second or third article on the Boxscore Geeks, Patrick, or when it was NBA Geek, was about how often teams fall for the sunk cost fallacy. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so Boston decided to trade Isaiah Thomas, who was their best player last season, Jay Crowder, arguably the best contract under $7 million. That's not a rookie contract deal in the NBA,
and their second best overall player.
Was second or third? Was he? So he was in front of Al Horford. That's awesome. Okay, so their two best players, and their best, and like I said, the best non-star, non-rookie contract in the NBA. Their Nets pick from next season, and remember the Nets. This is stupid. That this is a team that we at one point, Patrick, you went and put money on Vegas and said they have no reason to suck. This team has no reason to tank. They don't own their picks. They have some NBA players. This team cannot be this bad. And they injured Jeremy, not intentionally, but Jeremy Lin got injured, and they were that bad somehow. So and a Nets pick from next year, they traded that all for Kyrie Irving, which is just such a ludicrously bad trade. It was happenstance. A conversation we had last week, Brian, about Kyrie Irving inspired me to write my post for Tuesday, which was overhyped players going into the season. And Kyrie Irving, before any of this won, I said he was going to be the most overhyped player because all these teams were hoping for him. And then Boston, not only did they trade for him, this is what we were saying last week. We were saying Kyrie Irving's an above average player, but the amount of stuff you're going to have to give up to get him is just not worth the cost. And Boston proved it. So, Patrick, I'll let you jump in and talk about this trade, which I unlike a split decision for Rick and Morty and Game of Thrones, I got to imagine all of us think was just horrendously bad.
I wouldn't say it was horrendously bad. I think it was bad. It was bad. Like I think that Boston got fleeced a little bit. I feel like it's clear that in the very short term, Cleveland got better. Like they lost a good point guard, but they got a really good point guard in return. And oh yeah, by the way, here's this really good, defensive-minded small forward who can probably also play shooting guard. And I'm sure you're going to find some sweet lineups with both him and LeBron James out there. That was a really good, ignoring the pick, that was a really good trade in terms of actually improving their team this year. And then even if they let Isaiah Thomas go at the end of the year, they decide not to pay him. I can't remember Crowder has another year on the deal or not after this
Crowder's
year.
got 2 after this.
It's even better, right? So even if they let Isaiah Thomas go, they're in a great position, right? And they're out of, if like LeBron James leaves, they're out of that massive salary that they'd have to pay Kyrie Irving, and they're in a great position to like just sort of turn around and rebuild, I guess, for lack of a better word. It seems like a great trade for Cleveland. On the other hand, with Boston is like, I do agree with people that like they were going to have a really kind of catch-22 decision to make at the end of next year if Thomas had another great year, because he really is. He's been great, but he's nearing the end of his prime. And if his next contract is a max year and max dollar contract, that's not going to be a good contract in like year 3.
I'll jump in here real quick and say, and actually give some credence to people. Last season was an outlier year. And the thing about both Isaiah Thomas and Kyrie Irving is they're really good at is scores, right? They are, I've put Klay Thompson in this category. They're role players because they're not good ball handlers. They're not good at rebounding. Nobody gives them any credence on defense. Both of these players basically score 56% plus true shooting. And last season, Isaiah Thomas shot 62.6% true shooting, which is amazing. And so I could agree with the problem, right, is what happens if he goes back and next season shoots, his career average is 58.5%, which is very good. That's not worth a max contract. And so I agree. Yeah. I last year was an outlier-ish season, and he's going to command the money because points get paid. Right. So I think you're right. It's that like not only is he exiting his prime, he has been a good, not great player. And last season, the auspicious honor we gave him is he is the best player on a team that's won the conference in NBA.
Yeah, I think Boston, it was a unique situation because he was their best player, but they also had a lot of good players. So it's not like, the gap between him and the second place player wasn't as big as it would have been on some other teams. And I can't help thinking that Boston should have been able to make this deal by including a different player other than Jay Crowder, right? And I can't help wondering if they didn't include that other player because Cleveland insisted on Jay Crowder, which seems unlikely to me.
I've got some background on that, guys.
Okay. Well, as opposed to Danny Ainge just not really realizing which chips he should keep and which chips he should give up, and giving up the wrong chips.
Yeah, I've got a good article for that. So, there I found this. Let's see. Let me bring this up. It's from Real GM. It's nope, not that one. Jason Tatum was the sticking point in Cavs-Celtics talk. So Cavs wanted Jason Tatum. They coveted him. He's the rookie, high first-round draft pick. But they had to settle for Isaiah Thomas and Jay Crowder. Jesus. To me, that's just ridiculous. Like, let's just state the obvious that you guys will pile on. A rookie who's never played in the league has a much lower value than, proven near-star players, really, really good role players like Jay Crowder and Isaiah Thomas.
Especially underpaid ones.
So this is just such a big example of overvaluing rookies.
Yeah, that's true. It's insane. Like, Boston would be in such a much better position if they still had Crowder. My guess is they were saying, well, we have Gordon Hayward now. There's overlap there. Let's trade Crowder. But A, overlap isn't a bad thing, and B, like, you should keep the better player and the better contract in a trade like this. To me, this kind of, it's probably a terrible comparison, but this is sort of reminding me of when Minnesota traded Kevin Garnett and they got Sebastian Telfair, etc. in that deal instead of Rajon Rondo. It's like, the major pieces were kind of a given. You were going to get Al Jefferson, you were going to get a couple draft picks. But that other thing, like it actually mattered that you didn't get Rajon Rondo instead of Sebastian Telfair, right? The one might have made it a sort of an almost break-even trade, as much as you can do that when you're trading away an MVP. But the other made it a terrible, lopsided, horrible deal.
That's a good. I'll jump the gun. Last week I had a hypothetical, which was, kind of worse, crazier scenario. what if LeBron James is drafted by the Nuggets? Because, reminder, they had the same record as the Cleveland Cavaliers the year he came in. They had the same odds of getting him, and they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one being, what if Carlos Boozer had actually stuck to his word, his handshake deal, and stuck with Cleveland and given them a discount, so they would have had LeBron James and Carlos Boozer. They had a couple of years head start on what they had. Here's a really fun one. I'm going to have to think of you mentioned 3, and so maybe I'll put all 3 up in a poll. So we basically have Jay Crowder versus Jason Tatum, I believe. We have Sebastian Telfair versus Rajon Rondo, and Ben Wallace versus, I believe, John Amici. These are 3 examples of a star, I'll put in quotes, player leaving a franchise for a trade, and they're just being, as you kind of mentioned, just random deck chairs to shuffle around, and the GM, the team, whatever, picked wrong or right? Joe Dumars just kind of picked Ben Wallace instead of Amici, just kind of on a whim, and that was huge. As you noted, the Timberwolves did not pick Rondo. That was huge.
Well,
and
supposedly Ainge made it a sticking point, but here's the thing: is like my thoughts then to Kevin McHale was, who gives a shit what sticking point Danny Ainge is making? You're the one that has fucking Kevin Garnett. You get to dictate what the sticking points are. They don't, right? So I mean, it could have easily just been McHale saying, "Yeah, I got the MVP, so I don't really give a shit what you consider deal breakers. I want Rondo or no deal."
And I mean, at that point, it's not like Rondo's even a name or commodity. At that point, he was a decent rookie, still can't shoot. And, that's always been a sticking point in his career. So I agree with you there. And I mean, you need to look no further than like Pat Riley.
But let's be clear, Sebastian Telfair couldn't shoot either.
Like all I'm saying, actually, the other way around is you look at like Miami getting LeBron James and Pat Riley not giving a damn, but the other teams being like, we need something, and actually getting assets for LeBron James, even when it was just a sign-in trade. So,
well, that was just to appease LeBron, though.
That's true. But it's to appease LeBron and make the deals work. But that's what I'm saying is they go, we want LeBron on this contract, and the other team can go, you got to give us something. You can't give us nothing when and they'll do it because they're like, fuck, it's LeBron James. Who gives a damn? So You're right. Like, it's becoming. It's interesting. Like Ainge lost this one. I think was that Kahn back in the day that lost that one for Garnett.
No, that was McHale.
Okay, McHale. Yeah,
Kahn lost a lot of trades, but Kahn never made any big blockbuster trades. He always made these crappy trades for people making like $4 or $5 million a year. Like he loved they called him the Kahn tracks because he loved to like just waste all of his salary cap on these $4 to $5 million a year players.
Yeah. So,
which is worth a lot more back then than it is now.
Yeah, well, it's equivalent of like $10 million now.
Exactly.
Right? Like it's nowhere near the max, but if you just give it away like candy, then pretty soon your salary capped out anyway.
Yep, 100%. And then, I mean, I think the other interesting note. First off, I'll give a huge shout out, Dave Barry. He had been writing for Vice, but now he is actually writing for Forbes. And good news for all of you that are Dave Barry fans. His contract says he's supposed to write 5 articles a month, which is fantastic because, as you'll note, as the Boxscore Geeks shows, if you do this as a hobby and you do things like get married or get a dog or have a kid,
or get a new job,
or get a new job, or congratulations. You want to say that? Oh, congratulations, Patrick, new job.
It's been a couple months, but thanks.
Sure, I'm saying it's always up to you how much personal life you say, but congrats to Patrick on a new job for a couple months, which again impacts how much we write. All this stuff, but his contract is he's supposed to write 5 articles a month for them. And he did. His first article, unsurprisingly, was on Kyrie Irving. And his flippant remark at the very end is basically Danny Ainge has given LeBron James an 8th straight NBA Finals, which
I'm JJ Johnson, chef founder.
The problem out east is, Butler went west. That could have been something, and none of the teams seem well run enough for me to worry. Charlotte's a little interesting. I'll give Charlotte something, and of course we like the Heat.
Toronto looks pretty okay-ish, but it's hard to see any team. I mean, I think it's still Boston, but it's hard to see any team that would be like even money against the Cavs in the finals, right?
Conference finals.
I've got a really hard time putting myself into Boston's shoes and trying to figure out why this was a good trade. Because if you think about it, these teams were virtually the same last year in terms of record, right? They were, the Boston, I think, snuck up and took it by one game in the end to get the number one seed. So they basically had the same results. So if you think that LeBron is the best player by far on either of those two teams, which you probably should, then how does, even if you underrate Tristan Thompson and Kevin Love significantly, which I think most people do, I still don't see how you're going to say, wow, Kyrie Irving was responsible for all those wins, enough of the Cavs wins, that we're going to give up like our two leading win-giving guys. And I think an obvious answer is, well, Jay Crowder doesn't score any points, so we undervalue him. But it's just still so hard to me to get there. So, I forget who it was. One of our Wages of Wins, past contributors posted to me on Twitter about this. I'll have to bring that link up. Apologies for forgetting who you are, but it might have been Sean. Anyway, the whole point that Irving is 4 or 5 years younger, and he doesn't have this injury he's coming off of as bad as Thomas's injury, although he has had injuries himself. And my reply is, well, how long is your window for winning a title if you're either of those teams? I think it's 1 or 2 years at most, maybe more. And also, all these guys are free agents anyway. I don't care about the age or injury concerns or long term. Just for next year, it's hard to get into Danny Ainge's head.
I've got to agree with that point. We were talking this pre-show, Brian. Next year, this always drives me nuts. We were just talking about the same thing, Patrick, with giving up KG, and the argument teams always have is we don't want to lose him for nothing. The Timberwolves were close to a playoff team with Kevin Love, and they went, we don't want to lose him for nothing. What if we give the Cavaliers, three trips to the finals and an NBA title? Off of Kevin Love defense on one play of all things. So teams always have this mentality, but it's not that next year isn't meaningless. And so that's what's funny is if Isaiah Thomas goes to Cleveland and all he does, I'll put it in quotes, is help them get to the finals. And maybe, Golden State is just that much better. I mean, Golden State
or Houston for that matter.
Geez, Golden State and Houston at this point can both afford to basically lose a leg and still beat the team out east. There's only so much. Oh, interesting.
Don't forget injuries. Don't forget that the worst team sometimes wins.
It's true. It's true. I'm just saying I'm not going to bet against it. I'm not saying it can't happen. We already saw it happen, right? We already saw the extreme circumstances 2 years. But I'm saying I'm not betting on it. But that's the point is if all Isaiah Thomas does is get them to the finals and give them a fighting shot of winning a title, that was something that was worth it. And we were talking pre-show, Patrick. This is a point you always bring up is that the playoffs are just free money in terms of revenue for teams. And so if a player just helps you get a couple extra playoff games, that's just free money. So if you're going, we can't afford to pay him, it's like if they give you 1 year of 5 extra playoff games, that's $5 million. And that was old. That's old prices. That's old sticker prices. That's before the new CP.
I mean, people have to remember that player salaries are fixed. So LeBron James makes $23 million a year, and he makes that if they miss the playoffs. He makes that if they play 12 home games. He makes $23 million either way. So every playoff game is a set. You can think of it as a playoff game where they don't have to pay the player's salary, right? Yep. Or maybe a better analogy is, you get paid a salary at your job. You work 40 hours a week. Well, but you probably don't because sometimes you stay late at night to get a project done or whatever. Your employer does not pay you more money. So the playoffs are like that, right? It's like they're paid on a salary, and the playoffs are just kind of free money for the teams.
And it's a funny combination because you're basically saying the playoffs are overtime, but what we're noting is there are players that basically ensure overtime. And LeBron James, Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, these are 3 players that ensure overtime. And by the way, this kind of, I don't know, Jay Crowder, LeBron James, Isaiah Thomas, Tristan Thompson, Kevin Love. That's how can you not be excited about those 5? That's just
somebody was pointing out on Twitter, like when I think it might have been Arturo, like when LeBron sits, they have a legit good 5, right? They have when LeBron's on the bench, they can still trot out Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, Tristan Thompson, Kevin Love, and then somebody like what's his name, the Aston Kutcher lookalike,
Kyle Korver,
or
and they got Jay Crowder now.
That's what I'm saying. Like they have a legitimate, like pretty good team, even when LeBron is on the bench, which I don't think you could have said about this team for the last 3 years.
Oh yeah,
they're a little bit short of point guards.
It was pretty much like one of the best teams in the league when LeBron's on the court, and kind of iffy 30-win team without him, right?
Oh, that's a great point.
I got a few more, the same as you did, Brian. I got like 3 kind of points just to make. One thing that people are going to ding Isaiah Thomas on is defense and height. I hate to tell you this, hate to bring this up to you. The Cleveland Cavaliers had a worse defense last season than Boston. And you're fooling yourselves if you think Gordon Hayward is a better defender than LeBron James. That a lot of people bring that up. They said LeBron James' defense isn't as good, even though he was like second place in Defensive Player of the Year voting a couple of years ago. I accept that he's aged, but it's still interesting for people to suddenly think he's the reason the Cavaliers aren't at B. So yeah, you're fooling yourselves if you think like Gordon Hayward is a better defender than LeBron James, and you're fooling yourselves if you think defense is what's going to let Kyrie Irving catch up. What I tweeted out is, if by all of the scoring metrics, Isaiah Thomas was a better player than Kyrie Irving last season. And even if you're going to use the stupid usage curve argument, Isaiah Thomas took more shots per game and was more efficient than Kyrie Irving, and that was without LeBron James on his team. As a kind of sad tiebreaker, both Isaiah Thomas and Kyrie Irving had a really bad playoffs last season. I don't care about like the 1 or 2 good games Kyrie Irving had in elimination games in the finals. His overall playoffs was really crappy, and LeBron James put that team on his back and carried them to the finals again. And then the last point, I've heard some people note this: Kyrie Irving is being played out of position as a point guard, and he really is a better shooting guard. Maybe, but I always this like problem. We had problems with players like Carl Anthony.
All right, we've got some Skype lag, Dre, but I think you're going to be back soon. Okay, I think you're back now.
I'm just going to go over and say
Great, go ahead.
Kyrie Irving is being played out of position argument. This one drives me nuts because we've seen people argue LaMarcus Aldridge in the right scheme would be good. Carmelo Anthony in the right scheme would be good. And sometimes it happens, right? Like James Harden looked a lot better under D'Antoni. Steve Nash looked a lot better under D'Antoni. Though to be fair, those were great players becoming greater. I am always skeptical of arguing that this player is going to just suddenly figure it out and turn it on. Kyrie Irving, for his career, has been a below-average ball handler and a good but not great shooter. It's really odd to think that Brad Stevens is going to turn him into a great player. And if that's what you're hoping on, and that's why you're okay giving up the farm for him, I just got nothing.
That's what it is, Dre. I think people are saying, all these Boston guys are just kind of average players, and Stevens is really pumping them up. But then this, Coach LeBron and Coach Lou situation in Cleveland, this disaster holding Irving back. And that I think Arturo even posted on Twitter that, Irving can play defense. Once he gets with Brad Stevens, he'll coach him up, So that's what people are banking on. And I wouldn't be confident that coaching, even if you do think Cavaliers are worse at coaching, maybe that's true. It's just that gap is probably not enough to make up the huge talent gap.
I'll let you get final word on Cleveland, Isaiah, Boston, anything else, Patrick?
I don't really have a lot to say. I think I'm kind of looking forward to see what the Vegas over-unders are. I think there might be an opportunity to bet under on Boston, but I suspect it'll still be like sort of marginal. I suspect they'll still be super marginal, right? Like, I don't know, 52 or 53 or some number where you really don't want to go either way.
I'd take the under on 52 right now.
Yeah, but you don't know what's going to change really between now and then, and there's... Yeah.
One last thing, Drake. Cavaliers saved $29.1 million in luxury tax payments with this trade. Man, that was a great trade for the Cavaliers.
Because they're like repeat offenders too, so that's got to be more than that.
I mean, what's depressing because Brad Steve either Ainge or Stevens basically said we get this perennial all-star, and I hate to tell you this, based on his career numbers so far, based on both their career numbers so far, basically Kyrie Irving straight up for Jay Crowder is a win just because Jay Crowder is both a better fit. I don't know if you guys saw on the video show, I was getting really excited earlier, and it's because one argument we've had is that Kevin Love is being used out of position because Kyrie hogs so many possessions. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to look at Isaiah's possessions and see, Kevin Love might be a better player next season without Kyrie Irving playing like Kyrie Irving does.
I think Isaiah Thomas and Kevin Love in a pick and roll situation it looks a lot more deadly on paper, at least, than Al Horford and Isaiah Thomas, and then Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love, mostly because Irving rarely passed it to Kevin Love in pick and roll situations.
All right, that's going to be exciting. I'll have to maybe do some research. We'll see if that happens. I do want to briefly just give the sad news to Patrick. I think this had already been discussed. Andrew Wiggins is I think his agent negotiated a max deal, and he's cutting ties with his agent. And the sad news that you said, just kind of half-heartedly as a T-Wolves fan, is like this was just a foregone conclusion. He was going to get the max deal, and of course, if there was a franchise that was going to fall for it, of course the Timberwolves were.
Yeah, he might surprise everybody and become a good player, but I think he's Rudy Gay 2.0.
Agreed with that. And then the last one, the Clippers hire Michael Winger as general manager. Brian, this is you put on the script, but you basically said this guy's coming in from OKC, and we've argued. I think at one point I had a question: which team had wasted a core more, the Clippers or the Thunder? So, I guess
Michael Winger can be involved in both. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe he disagreed with everything in OKC and he wanted to keep James Harden, but my comment was just that's not a franchise that we've thought has made very good decisions lately, and not somewhere I'd go to want to buy, get a GM for my franchise. I'd want to go to the Spurs like a lot of other teams do. So, anyway,
can't be much worse than Doc Rivers as a GM though.
Yeah, the Clippers are they look finished. Like Paul George is gone, and not Paul George, Chris Paul, and people are saying, well, this will unshackle Blake Griffin and he'll be an MVP candidate this year. Well, I don't know. I think it's the opposite. I think the Clippers are going to be struggling to make the playoffs.
Well, for it's funny because people are bringing up Isaiah Thomas's hip injury, which is a valid concern. And it's one reason we still love that trade for Cleveland, because as we noted, if all they get is Jay Crowder and $29 million in cap relief, they still win. But Blake Griffin has just been beat up. And we've seen this like Derrick Rose. You do hit a point where you go, this player has a high ceiling, but it's a human body, and the human body can only take so much, especially if you're expecting it to play at a high athletic level. So, giving all of that money to Blake Griffin, who keeps doing this kind of like looks great, get injured. It's possible, right? It's possible this will be the year he figures it out, but I'm not betting on it.
It's looking grim.
All right, very last thing. I'm going to throw this out to the audience. I'll give two, so if you don't answer in the comments, it's fine. But if you want to answer in the comments, or if there are any better ones, looking at what the recent Cleveland Cavaliers did, the Cavaliers turned Anthony Bennett and Andrew Wiggins into Kevin Love, and then they've just turned Kyrie Irving into Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, and a future pick. How many teams have turned their number one pick into better assets? The only other one that easily comes to mind, of course, is the Orlando Magic. They turned Chris Webber into Anthony Hardaway, and then like 3 future first-round picks too. So I'm curious if there are other good examples of a team getting a number one pick and then flipping their own number one pick, right? It can't be like I flipped Braun into this in the future. Are there better examples of that? Because it's just a fun NBA history question. So if you've got better examples, feel free to throw them in the comments. Patrick, I'll let you get the last word. I don't have any. I think I already gave my shout outs like Dave Barry and stuff this week, so I don't have any official shout outs or endings. So I'll let you get your capper, Brian get the capper, and then that'll be this week's show.
I am woefully unprepared. I have no shout outs. I have nothing to say. I'm a loser. I'm sorry.
Are you quoting back right there?
Let me give a shout out to Meathead Goldwyn at AmazingRibs.com, because I just made some ribs last week that were like to die for based on one of his recipes. If you're interested in smoking meat or grilling meat or anything, go check that website out. It's pretty awesome.
We'll make sure to include it in the show notes. Brian, can you follow up Amazing Ribs? Do you have a shout out or topper better than that?
No, but I'll give a brief complaint about your scenario though. Your first draft pick scenario, which is that Chris Webber got traded from the Magic before he ever played a game with them. He was a draft day trade. So I think the Cavaliers are kind of a special case because they're trading away guys that are not just it's like, again, I hate saying putting players, as like commodities, but we're talking about the draft, so we all do this. It's like if you have a new car, once you drive it off the lot, it loses all its value, right? So the fact that the Cavs are able to get so much value for those guys after they'd already played for a year, that's very impressive to me.
That's an interesting one. Andrew Wiggins would be the same way too. Where
yes.
Anthony Bennett's included in that trade.
Yes.
That it to make cap work. So we might have to. Brian's being a jerk. We'll have to put two in the thing. We'll have draft day trade and then future trade. And by the way, there've only been like 40, 50 number one picks, so we're limiting stuff tremendously. But we'll see if dear readers, you or us can find anything better. All right, well, that has been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We are on iTunes and Stitcher as the Boxscore Geeks Show. You can subscribe, upvote. It helps us out. We go live every week at twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers, usually Tuesday or Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We did it this week, guys. Go us. And then if you catch the live show, you can catch the recap on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. Co-host Patrick Minton, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek, and produced by Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Hopefully next week will be as exciting, and tune in for our thrilling conclusion of Game of Thrones versus Rick and Morty.